Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who would take a ghost story from their drunk uncle over Henry James any day of the week. Each month we spin the wheel and land on a new genre. Spies, mysteries, horror, romance, SF, it's all on the shelf. And right now we are reading every short story from Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Marion Crawford's The Screaming Skull. I'm Zach, and this week I'm really interested in that fine line that separates the ghost story and the weird.
Oh, I'm Bob. Zach, I'm in the same boat as you. Ann and Jeff VanderMeer say that they know the weird when they see it, and I feel like I don't see the weird in this story. I want to see what is weird about it, why it's included, because to me, it feels like a gothic horror story. We have a narrator who is telling us things in a sort of monologue. He has been not having visions. He is seeing a skull. A skull is actually coming to him and screaming. Occasionally, it seems like it's... Yes, it happens. It happens to the best of us. And he feels guilty in a way. He tells us why. And it's a long monologue of... It's almost like he's lying to himself and to us. But he's talking to his old buddy, his old sailing buddy. And then, in the middle of the story, they're visited by the skull again. But to me, it feels like... the clinking chains, the thing behind the sheet, it feels like a ghost story.
Well, I'll say from the start that it is self-consciously a ghost story in the sense that it's not just the story of one person's encounter with some artifact from beyond the grave, but it's also like him telling this story to another person. This is a first-person monologue. And the fun part about that, I think, is that we don't get a narrator that we can trust. Like, it's not an objective third-person narrator who tells us, that's a ghost. That clanking you hear, that's chains. We don't get anything like that. We get this person who's clearly lying to themselves or deluded in some way about their role in the murder of the wife of the guy who used to live in this house. It's a very convoluted chain of stuff, but basically he's self-deluded in what exactly his role is. He's self-deluded on whether she actually was murdered or not. As far as he's concerned, he just told the husband a really interesting way to kill people without evidence, and then the guy's wife died. So we as readers know that something is truly going on, but for the narrator of this ghost story, he seems like he's doing everything he can to not become aware of the supernatural elements of this story. And to me, that is what makes it so interesting.
I really love the style too. You know how second person became really popular again maybe 10 years ago? This is not even second person. However, the listener is referred to all the time. And the weird experience, I think, is me as the reader kind of being that other friend, the friend that's listening to this story, because he will say things like, don't call it the evil bugbear, don't call the skull names. It just comes out all of a sudden from this monologue. Then earlier too, he's lighting matches and none of the matches will light. And he says, I'm trying, stuff like that. So you are implicated in the story in a way that feels weird. We're positioned in a way that feels weird and uncomfortable because now, not only do we not believe him, but we're also his buddy and kind of complicit in whatever he's done. I think another weird element too is, earlier you said, yeah, it's framed as a ghost story. But he doesn't even know how to define it. At one point he says, ghost? No, you don't call anything a ghost that you can't take in your hands and look at in broad daylight and that rattles when you shake it. Can you now? But it's something that hears and understands. There's no doubt about that. So I think the being unable to define really what is happening to him also makes it a little bit weird.
And also, it's weird, yes, but it's also really fun, all the ways that he rationalizes all the things.
That's true. Yeah.
The skull clearly bites him, and he's like, oh, I must have just accidentally pressed my thumb on the jaw. Yeah. And then it bites his friend, and he's like, oh, yeah, you must have pressed the jaw too, you see? Oh, you're really bleeding there. It really almost took off your finger. And then, my favorite moment was, so he brings out the box, which he placed the skull in, which has been tied up and sealed with wax. And the skull is missing. And then they hear the scream outside. He's like, someone must have taken this thing. But then they hear the scream outside and a knock on the door. And they open it. And of course, it's the skull. And the skull starts sliding across the floor at him. And he's like, wow, that wind sure is blowing that skull across the floor. Just the lengths that this guy goes to rationalize everything is so fun, so hilarious.
It's a really, really good story. It's scary too. Like while you're getting sucked into his monologue, because he's not like an eloquent speaker, but there's something mesmerizing or intoxicating about the way he's telling the story. I think one of my favorite moments is when he's telling his friend what happened before. What you were just talking about is what suddenly starts happening. But he tells his friend, when I went to go find the skull the first time, I dropped it and it was on a steep slope. And I thought it was sure strange because, yeah, it was a steep slope, but it just rolled uphill. Wow.
Yeah. And then his unwillingness to recognize anything about the murder that's taken place. Like the method of murder that he told this other person about was pouring lead into the ears of someone while they sleep. Nasty business. But inside the skull, there's a rattling and clanking, and he's like, well, surely all skulls have a little something clanking around in there. And then he finds the jawbone in the garden, or rather the gardener does. And he says, oh, it must be the jawbone from a different skull. You know, maybe some human specimen taken back from the hospital where the guy worked. And he said, that doesn't explain the human hair and other remains found there, but it explains the jawbone. I think for me, all of these little details, this slow buildup is actually more fun than the reveal at the end. Like the reveal at the end is almost secondary because we've already projected the ending. We already know how it's going to end from the very beginning. But he takes his time to give us these really interesting and fun revelations that keep the reader, I don't want to say one step ahead. I might even say 5 steps ahead of where the narrator is.
And maybe that is the weird of it, is the experience of reading the story, not so much the revelation at the end. Because we've all seen it coming. We all know what's going to happen. Like I said, we are 5 steps ahead. But the fun, the joy of the weirdness of going through it is the weird. The guilt, too, I think is interesting because when we were reading the introduction, they said, okay, people become obsessed. They try and come up with an explanation for something, and they are constant. Their theories are constantly disproved, or they just go crazy while they're trying to theorize what's happening to them. And he begins the story by saying, I have always blamed myself for Mrs. Pratt's death, and I suppose I was responsible for it in a way, though heaven knows I only ever wished her nothing but long life and happiness. So he knows he is guilty in a way, and you say he won't admit it to us, he won't admit it to himself. And why is the skull itself so bent on killing him? You know, he just mentioned this story, and it seems kind of accidental, or just coincidental. Not coincidental, but he can't really be blamed. He just mentions something he read before, and it's Mr. Pratt, as far as he tells us, that does it. But every time he tells us that, the skull comes back and it screams. It's almost like he's lying. Then finally, when he's already told us this has happened to someone else, the skull will bite someone's windpipe, and it comes in and bites his windpipe. He dies, but we never exactly know how guilty he was. So while his theories are always disproved, it feels like ours are too as readers.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that we can't trust him as a narrator, or rather, he demonstrates time and time again that we can't take him fully at his word. And the fact that he dies in the end from the crushed windpipe, from the teeth of the skull, it really calls into question the actual culpability he had in the murder of this person. Because you have to imagine that if someone was haunting you beyond the grave, for me, I would hope if someone was going to haunt me, I'd have a good reason to be haunted. You know what I mean? I wouldn't want to be collateral damage of a haunting. You know what I'm saying? So the fact that he was also killed by this skull seems to suggest that he's not giving us the full story of what he actually said and how premeditated this murder was. You know, we already talked about the form of this, but I'm curious for you, what sets F. Marion Crawford apart from other writers? Well, I guess the one other writer that we've read in this anthology so far.
Oh, well, the voice is very different, but it is a monologue, and it is the kind of perfecting this old sailor's talk. I think the way that we get wrapped up into the story when he seemingly is talking about almost nothing is quite different from Cuban, where it's like, monkeys are riding horses. They're stealing horses and riding them like little knights and stealing bread from us. This is someone becoming unglued while also trying to tell us something in a clear way. And I feel like there are two, earlier, when we read the introduction, they said, okay, there are two main kind of approaches to writing weird fiction. There's the Lovecraftian bent, and then there's the Kafkaesque bent. This feels almost like neither, but more Lovecraft in a way, because we're not trusting his interpretation of things anymore. He seems to have lost his grip on reality. And as he tells us what he thinks is happening, we know already that something is not quite right.
And, also the monologue gives us a really good window into interiority. This is something we saw time and time again when we were reading Shakespeare together, that the monologue is like a classic tool that writers can use to truly give us the depth of one's character. And this is all depth of character. And if we compare it to Alfred Cuban's story, you gave those images of like monkeys riding the horses. His story is all exteriority. It's all images. It's all things happening out in the world. And it's very dreamlike in the sense that people are just little toys on a little setting for him to move around, But here, it's all like the intrusion of memory, for example, is so huge in this. He's a former sailor, and he interrupts his monologue to tell us things like, oh, the natural world never wakes me up. It's always unnatural things. Just like any sailor, I could sleep through, a giant storm, a hurricane, something like that. But as soon as there's a little, leaded pencil that's rolling around in the desk loose, I'm up. Details like that are what truly gives the story character and dimension in a much greater way than what we've seen previously.
I'm very interested in reading more Frances Marion Crawford. I thought this was a blast. It's goofy, it's fun, it's scary somehow. It doesn't seem like it should be scary, and the way we've talked about it does not feel scary at all. But I did find myself feeling a little frightened while I'm reading this story. I would love to read more of this author.
I would too. I think next time we do a round of horror stories, we need to hit the 19th century hard.
As hard as a skull against a door.
Yes. Rat-tat-tat-tat. All right. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
Talk to you later, Zach.